The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the world feel heavier. A little girl, no older than 5, sat alone on a worn wooden bench in the middle of the park. The soft glow of the street lamp barely reached her, casting long shadows across the grass. Her tiny legs dangled off the edge, her small fingers clutching the hem of her dress. But it wasn't the loneliness that caught the attention of Officer Daniels, who had been patrolling the area. It was the way she stared at the sky, her big, sorrowful eyes locked onto the stars, as if searching for something or someone. Officer Daniels had been a cop long enough to know when something didn't feel right. A child alone at this hour, no guardian in sight. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "Are you lost?" The little girl didn't flinch. She just kept looking at the stars. And then, in a quiet, almost fragile voice, she whispered, "Mommy said she'd be there." Daniels felt something tighten in his chest. "Where's sweetheart?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She finally turned her gaze toward him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Up there," she said, pointing to the sky. She said if I ever felt lonely, I should look at the stars, and she'd be watching. For a moment, the officer didn't know what to say. He had seen a lot in his years on the force: crime, heartbreak, families torn apart. But there was something about this little girl, sitting there in the dark, waiting for her mother's presence in the sky, that hit him harder than he expected. He sat down beside her, the weight of the night settling in. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Lily," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name, Lily. Is your mom around?" He hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question without breaking her even more. Lily swallowed hard and shook her head. "She's with the angels now." Daniels felt a lump in his throat. He glanced around, scanning the park. There were no other adults nearby. No frantic parents looking for a missing child. No sign that she had wandered off from a family gathering. "How did you get here?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated, hugging her small arms around herself as if trying to hold in the sadness. "I walked," she said. "I wanted to see the stars. I wanted to talk to Mommy." Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. It was clear this little girl had been through something no child should ever have to endure. But there was something else, something unspoken. He could feel it. "Lily, does anyone know you're here?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I didn't tell them." "Tell who?" She hesitated, her little fingers twisting into her dress. "My new family." Daniel's heart clenched. A foster home, maybe. A relative. Either way, she had run away. And she was too young to be wandering the city alone at night. "Lily," he said gently, "it's really late. How about we find someone who can take you home?" Tears welled up in her eyes then, spilling down her cheeks. "I don't want to go back," she whimpered. Daniels felt something inside him break at the sound of her tiny, trembling voice. He wanted to press further, to ask why, but he knew better than to push too hard. Children spoke when they were ready. Instead, he reached for his radio, keeping his voice calm. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniels. I have a found child at Eastwood Park. No guardian in sight. Requesting assistance." Lily wiped her tears with the back of her hand, sniffling. "Mommy told me to be brave," she whispered. Daniels nodded. "She sounds like she was really special." Lily gave a small nod, but her lip trembled. "She always took me here before she got sick. We'd lay on the grass and look at the stars. She said if I ever missed her, I could find her up there." Daniels exhaled slowly. He had been expecting to deal with a lost child tonight, not a little girl carrying the weight of grief too heavy for her small shoulders. Then, just as he was about to reassure her that she wasn't alone, Lily's next words sent a chill through him. "Mommy left me a message," she said, barely above a whisper. Daniels furrowed his brow. "A message?" She nodded, reaching into the small pocket of her dress and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. Her tiny fingers smoothed it out carefully before handing it to him. Daniels hesitated before taking it. He unfolded the fragile paper and saw shaky, handwritten words that made his breath hitch. And then, as he read the note under the dim glow of the street lamp, he realized this wasn't just a message. It was a mother's final wish. This leaves the story on a gripping cliffhanger, keeping viewers engaged for the next part. Would you like to tweak anything or add more details? Daniels held the crumpled note in his hands, his pulse quickening as he read the words. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in pain, yet every word carried the weight of a mother's love. "If you find this, please take care of my little girl. Her name is Lily. She deserves to be safe, to be happy. Please, if there's any kindness left in the world, don't let her be alone." The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if the ink itself carried the sorrow of a mother who had known her time was running out. Daniels looked back at Lily, her small face barely visible under the dim light. She was watching him carefully, waiting, hoping. His voice was gentle but firm. "Where did you get this, sweetheart?" Lily sniffled and wiped her nose with the sleeve of her dress. "Mommy gave it to me before she went to sleep forever. She said someone would find it when it was time." Daniels felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at the note again, the edges soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a plea. "Who do you live with now?" he asked carefully. Lily hesitated, shifting on the bench. "Aunt Rachel," she finally whispered, "but she's not really my aunt." Daniels frowned. "What do you mean?" Lily's little fingers played with the hem of her dress. "She takes care of kids like me, ones without mommies or daddies. A foster home." That explained why Lily didn't want to go back. Daniels had encountered too many cases where children ended up in homes that didn't really feel like home. Some were good, filled with love and warmth. But others were just a place to sleep, a place to wait. "Is she mean to you?" he asked, watching her carefully. Lily didn't answer right away. She just stared at the ground, kicking her tiny feet back and forth. "She doesn't like when we cry," she finally whispered. "She says it makes us weak." Daniels clenched his jaw. A 5-year-old girl, grieving her mother, and she wasn't even allowed to cry. He reached out, gently placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You're not weak for missing your mom," he said softly. "And you're not alone, okay?" Lily nodded, but Daniels could see the doubt in her eyes. The distant hum of sirens grew louder, and soon another patrol car pulled up. Officer Reed stepped out, her expression shifting from professional to concerned the moment she saw Lily. "This is the missing girl from the report," Reed said quietly as she approached. "Her foster mother reported her gone a few hours ago." Daniels exhaled, then turned back to Lily. "We have to take you home, sweetheart. But I promise you, we'll make sure you're safe." Lily looked up at him, searching his face for something. Trust, safety, a reason to believe. Finally, she gave a small nod. Daniel stood up, taking her small hand in his. As they walked toward the car, he glanced at the note one last time. He wasn't sure what had happened before Lily was placed with this foster family, but something about this whole situation felt wrong, and he wasn't going to ignore it. As they drove, Lily stayed quiet, her tiny hands clutching the seatbelt. She kept looking out the window, her expression unreadable. When they pulled up to the house, a woman stood on the porch, arms crossed. She was in her late 40s, her hair tied back in a tight bun. The moment she saw Lily, her lips pressed into a thin line. "There you are," Rachel said, her voice clipped. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Daniels didn't like her tone. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, we found her alone at the park. She said she walked there by herself." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "She does this sometimes. She has emotional issues." Daniels looked down at Lily, who had shrunk behind him, her small hands gripping his uniform. "Is that true, Lily?" he asked gently. Lily didn't answer. She just stared at the ground, her little fingers trembling. Daniel's gut told him something was off. He pulled Rachel aside. "If she's running away, there's a reason. Is everything all right here?" Rachel gave a tight smile. "Look, officer, I take care of a lot of kids. Some of them act out. They miss their parents, and they don't understand how life works. I do my best, but I can't control every little tantrum." Daniels didn't like how dismissive she sounded, but without proof of neglect or mistreatment, there wasn't much he could do. He crouched down next to Lily, lowering his voice. "If you ever feel unsafe, you call me, okay?" He slipped a small card into her pocket with his number on it. "Anytime. I'll come." Lily looked up at him, her eyes glistening. She gave the smallest nod. Rachel sighed. "Come on, Lily. Inside. Now." Lily hesitated before stepping toward the house. But just as she reached the door, she turned and whispered, "She wrote more." Daniels frowned. "What do you mean?" Lily's voice was barely audible. "Mommy wrote another letter." And then, before he could ask, she disappeared inside. Daniel stood there for a long moment, the cold air settling around him. There was more to this story, and he wasn't going to walk away from it. Daniel stood outside the house longer than he should have, his mind racing with Lily's last words. She wrote more. What did that mean? Another letter? Something her mother had left behind, and why hadn't Rachel mentioned it? He didn't like the way Lily had hesitated before going inside. He didn't like the way Rachel spoke about her, as if she were just another problem to deal with instead of a grieving little girl. His gut told him there was something here, something more than just a child running away to look at the stars. That night, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that Lily needed help. He stayed up, going through old case files, looking into Rachel's foster home. Nothing alarming showed up, at least, not on paper. But sometimes the worst things didn't leave a trail. The next morning, Daniels made a call to a child welfare officer he trusted. "Can you look into the placement of a girl named Lily?" he asked. "Something about her situation doesn't sit right with me." By afternoon, he had an answer. She was placed with Rachel about 6 months ago, the caseworker told him. But here's the thing, her mother didn't officially surrender custody before she passed. There were complications. Rachel took her in under an emergency foster placement. Daniels frowned. So what happened to her mother's wishes? The caseworker hesitated. "That's the problem. We don't have any official documentation from the mother, just the foster placement order." Daniel's stomach sank. The letter. The one Lily's mother had written, the one Lily had hinted there was more of. What if her mother had left instructions? What if she had wanted something different for her daughter, and no one had listened? Daniels knew he had to see Lily again. That night, he returned to the house. He knocked on the door, and Rachel answered, looking irritated. "What now?" she asked. Daniels kept his expression neutral. "I need to speak with Lily." Rachel scoffed. "She's asleep. And I don't see why a cop needs to keep showing up here." "I just have a few questions," Daniel said, his tone firm. "It won't take long." Rachel sighed, but before she could refuse, a small voice came from behind her. "Officer Daniels." Lily stood in the hallway, clutching something in her small hands. A folded piece of paper. Daniels crouched down. Is that the other letter, sweetheart? Lily nodded and glanced up at Rachel, fear flashing in her eyes. Rachel's face darkened. Lily didn't. But before she could finish, Lily darted forward, shoving the paper into Daniel's hand. He unfolded it quickly, scanning the words written in the same shaky handwriting. If anything happens to me, please know that my sister, Emily, is supposed to take Lily. She is her family. She loves her. Please let Lily be with her. That is my only wish. Daniels looked up sharply. Who's Emily? Rachel's expression tightened. That's not relevant. Daniels ignored her. He turned back to Lily. Do you know who Emily is? Lily nodded. She used to visit before Mommy got really sick. But then she stopped coming. I don't know why. Daniel's jaw clenched. He had heard enough. Rachel, did you tell anyone about this letter? He asked, his voice sharp now. Rachel crossed her arms. It doesn't matter. The system placed her here. That's what matters. Daniels felt anger rise in his chest. The system. Sometimes it failed the very people it was meant to protect. He stood. Lily, sweetheart, we're going to find Emily. Rachel's face twisted. You can't just take her. Daniels leveled her with a cold stare. I can, and I will. By morning, Daniels had tracked down Emily. She lived 2 states away, and when she answered the phone, she sounded stunned. I was told I wasn't allowed to take her, she said, her voice breaking. I fought for custody, but they said my paperwork wasn't enough. I didn't have the right resources. Daniels cut in. Lily needs you. And I think her mother wanted that too. A week later, Emily arrived, her eyes filled with tears the moment she saw Lily. The little girl hesitated for just a moment before running into her arms. It was a moment Daniels wouldn't forget. Rachel protested, but the law was clear. Lily's mother had left her wish in writing, and this time someone listened. As Daniels watched Lily leave with her aunt, she turned back, looking up at him with wide, grateful eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Daniels smiled. You take care, all right. Lily nodded. Mommy was right, she said softly. Daniels tilted his head. About what, sweetheart? Lily glanced up at the sky, where the stars were just beginning to appear. She said someone would find me when it was time. Daniels felt something deep in his chest. He looked up at the stars, then back at Lily. She was watching over you, he said, and she always will. And with that, Lily took Emily's hand, stepping into a new life, one where she was wanted, one where she was loved. Daniel stood there a moment longer, staring at the stars, before turning and walking back to his patrol car. Some cases stayed with you forever. This was one of them.